Hello there, Jeanne Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And a bottle that I've been hanging on to for a little while because I wanted to do a review on this, but I also wanted to potentially interview the founders of the distillery. It is Cook's Mill, and I will be doing a interview with them coming up in about a month. So keep your eyes out for that because they have a fascinating story. This is a North Carolina straight bourbon whiskey, and it's been getting some great reviews. And so I decided I wanted to do a little tasting and do a full interview. And so that'll be, like I say, coming up in about a month. But right now, I'm eager and want to do a tasting of this for you. Now, this is a whiskey that right now is only available in North Carolina, South Carolina, and soon to be Tennessee. But the plans are to grow it out from there. It's an interesting whiskey because the inspiration was a mill, a 18th century mill that has ties back to pre-Revolutionary War situations, including a man who was one of the people arrested for the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania, Herman Husband. And so we'll talk a little bit about that history in the podcast episode that will be coming up. But I wanted to do a tasting on this whiskey and maybe introduce you and tease you a little bit with some of the information about this. Very interesting that this grist mill, with its history back into the 1700s, would have been a place where the community comes together. This is where, if you want to get yourself a community started, you build a grist mill that allows people to come in who are farmers and be able to turn their corn into cornmeal, make whiskey if they want to make whiskey. It really was a center point for a community. And this particular mill, a couple came in, purchased it, and it was still in pretty good shape. And so they want to preserve it. So they're going through and working on how they can pull that off, and part of it is through selling a whiskey. And as a part of our history, there's actually a mill up in Tennessee that I want to go see that is a pre-Revolutionary War mill that I don't think it has been kept up very well, but it still exists. And these are parts of our history, especially as a whiskey lover, that are important and reminders. Like when I went to Tennessee and I went to David Crockett State Park and went and saw the millstone that he used in his grist mill where he had a distillery. It all connects into that history. So great to see that they are trying to preserve this distillery. But not only that, there are some Waterford, for people who watch the podcast, there are some Waterford qualities to what they're trying to do with corn, and we're going to dive deep into that as well. But this particular whiskey is one where they chose the variety of corn they wanted. They found a particular farm in North Carolina to source that grain from, and then they came up with this whiskey that has been aging for a couple of years. Has a little picture of the mill wheel as well, and the millstone. So really nice presentation for this. North Carolina's distilling tradition goes back, we can count Tennessee's early tradition as being North Carolina's distilling tradition, since Tennessee didn't come about until 1796, and the property of Tennessee didn't really become Tennessee, or actually was taken away from North Carolina in 1790. So, but anything before that, you could really kind of count as North Carolina distilling tradition. But they had distilling going on, and it was actually not as big as Kentucky and Tennessee, but there was a substantial amount of distilling that was going on in North Carolina, especially before Tennessee and Kentucky really got going. So in the pre-Revolutionary War era, guessing that they probably were distilling more rum at that time than they were distilling whiskey, but still, plenty of grain being grown around and the ability for that industry to grow up. But it actually, they went into Prohibition earlier than even Tennessee did. Tennessee went in 1909, and May 28th of 1908 is when North Carolina went into Prohibition. A lot of the southern states all just said, forget it. They call it the Bible Belt. Well, Baptists were not whiskey drinkers. There was a lot of sentiment against it. Some other things came up that kind of pushed North Carolina over the edge, and they went into Prohibition. And it has taken them a long time, just like with Tennessee, to come out of that. So it's interesting to see the growth now of North Carolina distilling. Don't have a mash bill on this, probably around 75% corn. It is a high-ish rye, as I understand it. A lot of caramel on the nose. I get, the traditional bits of oak and rye in here. He's not using any particular special grain for this, just basic corn that everybody else across the industry, for the majority, uses. But they are working with heirloom varieties of corn, and they are growing corn. This is where I talk about the Waterford kind of aspect of what they're doing. They are working to see if some of these corn, heirloom corn varieties will work for making whiskey, and how good they will be. And so we may see some experimentation coming out. That is their ultimate goal on what they are making right now. There is an underlying, it's really an herbal rye spice that's coming through on that, and that caramel note as well. Cheers. When I tasted this first time and nosed it, I was getting a berry character out of it. And so Jason, one of the founder, said that he was really looking for a bubblegum note, because he said when you get a really good high-end whiskey, you tend to get a bubblegum note. After I heard that, I tasted it and I went, Big League Chew. It just reminded me, there was this hint of Big League Chew, that berry note that I was talking about. Maybe a strawberry kind of a note. It definitely has an element of that in there. And then there's some nice little char heat from the rye, but it's very mellow. It is not aggressive at all. For a whiskey that is supposed to be around 3 years old, it's very well distilled. It's a nice drinker. It surprises me, actually, in a way, because sometimes these earlier variations on whiskey can be a little bit rough in some way or another. There's always some excuse that you put out there and say, it's young, so, there's a little bit of tannin in there, or there's some alcohol bite to it. But this doesn't have any of that. It's at 44% ABV. It's just a very nicely done whiskey, and it will be interesting to see, because this is going to be their flagship, how they evolve this, whether they continue to keep it around the same age range or whether they push it. They use a number 3 char barrel, so in doing that, it's a slightly lighter char than you're going to find in like a Jim Beam, those types of whiskeys. And so I think what that's doing is it's bringing a little bit more of a finesse to this particular bourbon at a younger age. So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes in the future. As I say, watch for the interview. It's fun talk, and we go through a little bit of history. We go through the process and how they came about distilling this whiskey and what their plans are for the future. Leave me a like if you enjoyed the video today. As I say, watch for that video coming down the road, and subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these down the road. Until next time, cheers and Slainte. Nice caramel notes all the way around. Very nice. This has gotten some nice notoriety. Dusty Dan actually left really great review on this, and I can understand why. And I will say, when you first open the bottle, don't judge it immediately, because when I first opened the bottle, it needed a little bit of time to oxidize in there. Right now, it is at a really nice point. Cheers.